Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your mid-month astrology update for January of 2021. It's been a crazy, crazy month so far, and all I can say is, as shocking as it's been, it has not been surprising. Things are continuing to unfold right on schedule when we look at the relationship between what's happening down here on Earth and what's happening up there in the sky. Before we jump into the material for the last couple of weeks of January, I just wanted to invite or re-invite for some of you, but invite those who are watching to the Astrology Foundation's Level 2 course, which will begin on February 12th. And this is through the Astrology Hub. And I know many of you were with me through the original Astrology Foundations course last fall. This is a level 2, and it's basically taking a step beyond the basics. It's a 5-week course on chart analysis and synthesis. You can unfold the course completely at your own pace. But we're going to dig in a little bit into reading charts, both for your own chart, yourself, and for others. One cannot learn astrology in 5 weeks or even 10 weeks. This is a lifetime study, but for those of you who are looking to get my perspective and some more foundations, go to Astrology Hub, and that is actually www.astrologyhub.com/foundations2 astrologyhub.com/foundations2, and you can find out more about the curriculum week by week and register if you are so inclined. And for those of you who are, we will see you there. Okay, back to January. Going back a year and a half ago or so, as I began looking at the astrology of 2020 in greater detail, I realized, as did most astrologers around the world, that we were in for some pretty intense times come 2020 that opened with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on the same day that the COVID virus had its first announced mortality, and the genome was brought into the light from the Wuhan labs in China. From that period on through the Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions, which we all knew were going to bring up things that were from the underworld, Pluto, Jupiter bringing them out into the open. And the events, though, that actually unfolded with a combination of the COVID-19 pandemic and our mixed response around the world to meeting it, the politicization of the pandemic, and it being tied to much larger issues that were coming up out into the open, including systemic racism that through the murder of George Floyd and other events brought up material that has been in our face all along, but somehow exploded into awareness in a way that I don't think anyone could have imagined. And the reaction to that, fed and fueled by, in particular, President Trump, and the undertone of unexpressed energy in this country that Trump was actually riding the wave of and representing, and the reaction to this deep what's the right word? Revelation, apocalypse, the uncovering of that which had been there, that has forced many people in the United States in particular, but around the world, to really dig deeply and to reevaluate where we're coming from, where we're at, and perhaps and hopefully where we are going to. So as we reached January, we astrologers knew that the Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the end of December in 2020 was an absolute turning point. And because all of these energies of 2020 were so tied up in the presidential politics in the United States, that almost became a focal point for a lot of the stuff that has been unfolding and continues to unfold. Now, I must say, the first half of January was shocking to see the capital of the United States overtaken, and to see Confederate flags being unfurled for the first time ever. That didn't even happen during the Civil War. To see Confederate flags within the United States Capitol, to see an armed insurrection occurring, people were killed at this insurrection, and to see this unfold, and to see the deep level of frustration and anger and confusion and hate that came to the surface was not a surprise. It was shocking, but it was not a surprise, because we can't talk about the events of what's going on for the next couple of weeks of January without tying them into the trajectory that goes all the way back to the beginning of January a year ago, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020. And of course, as soon as we bring in a large cycle like that, we immediately click back over the centuries and see how the issues that we're dealing with now are not new issues. They're issues that have been going round and round and round again and again and again. But this time, things are a bit different because they've reached a critical mass at a time when technology is giving us such an instantaneous and immediate feedback capability that we are being pushed through an eye of a needle very, very quickly. And as I've been saying for at least 6 months, actually more than that, anyone who knows what's going on, or anyone who thinks they know what's going on, doesn't. Even the people who knew what was going on and were in control have lost control. We are at a very exciting and dangerous point because it is being defined and made up as we move along. We are seeing evolution in process. You know, there have been for at least a century and a half a discussion of whether evolution is cataclysmic or gradual. Darwin was a fan of this gradual evolution, and yet there are many people who believe that evolution occurs cataclysmically. And as an astrologer, I must say that I would fall into the cataclysmic side, that although there are gradual developments along the way, there are certain key points, there are key events where the waves of the universe are brought into particular manifest form and those events become highly significant. We are still in the midst of one such event. We might say that we're at the tail end of it, but that's not quite true, because events of this magnitude take weeks, months, years, decades to unfold, to really see the full ramifications of what has occurred. If you were alive at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction back in January of 1519, I think it was, I've lost the date in my head. That happened within a couple of months of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. No one alive during that period of time would have understood the profound changes that one event in Germany would have created over the course of the centuries to come. This is the kind of event that we have experienced, that we are experiencing, and that is still unfolding. It's rather dramatic to be alive at such a time, because it calls into questions all of our beliefs, all of our sense of solidity. It's like an earthquake that happens in a moment, but this is a life quake that happens over the course of weeks, months, and in this case, over the course of several years, but they come to light at specific moments. And January 6th was one of those moments. But now I want to shift gears and I want to talk specifically about the astrology, which we couldn't have talked about unless I gave that little bit of a preamble. You see, since last August, I've been saying that it's not over when it seems to be over. I've been saying that the Saturn-Pluto conjunction will have ramifications through 2020 into 2021, but that even the events over the summer, the conjunctions of Jupiter and Pluto, starting with April, going through November of 2020, and the actual conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in December of 2020, that the key player in all of this that would define when this sequence of events has kind of come to its peak, at least in this particular outbreak of this particular intellectual, spiritual, emotional brush fire that we've just been through, that the key player is Mars. And I remember talking about this on my weekly talks on the Astrology Hub and the Cosmic Conversations, Cosmic Connection there, and on these monthly updates going back to August, because in August, Mars had already turned retrograde. Remember, Mars spends about 7 weeks or so in each sign, and when it turns retrograde, it hangs out in the same area of the sky, not always the same sign like it did this time, but the same area of the sky for 7 months. Mars entered Aries the end of June 2020, and it turned retrograde in September 9th. It turned direct in mid-November, but it's only now that Mars is finishing the intense work that it stirred up when it first was moving direct through Aries back in August. In August, Mars, as it moved direct through Aries, formed squares with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. These were the three heavyweight planets that had clustered in Capricorn. And Mars moving direct made squares with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in August. Of course, presidential politics during that period of time was already at a fevered pitch. Then Mars turned retrograde, and it backed over those same three planets in October, actually September 29th and October 9th and October 18th. Mars backed over those same three planets. It turned direct the week after Election Day, on which Mars turned direct the week after Election Day, but Mercury turned direct on Election Day. And of course, we had been in this incredible retrograde cycle with Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto all moving in and out of retrograde through the second half, or through the most of last year, but mostly through the second half of last year. And Venus did a retrograde stint in there, as did Mercury and, of course, Mars. So the reason why we're talking about this right now is that the simple, singular, most important thing to understand what's going on right now, and why the events of January, which are kind of an after effect of what went on all last year, including pandemic, election, racist awareness, and that flowering in a way that I don't think anyone expected. There were certainly many people who had been working on this for decades, for a century or more, since the Civil War, since before then. But the fact is that something very, very powerful happened in 2020 that many people were calling an awakening, an opening. But at the same time, we were seeing a suppression and a holding back. Now, where this all leads to is that Mars, now moving direct, has gone through the latter degrees of Aries and has now entered the early degrees of Taurus, fixed sign, Taurus, Aries, cardinal sign. As Mars was moving back and forth through Aries, it was making squares with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in cardinal sign Capricorn. But Jupiter and Saturn both moved out of Capricorn into Aquarius, where they joined up. And so it wasn't until Mars actually left Aries, and remember, Mars actually entered Taurus on the first week of this year, on Wednesday, January 6th. Mars entered Taurus. And as Mars entered Taurus on January 6th, Mars was doing a final run toward finishing up the business that it had started activating all the way last year when it first moved into Aries back at the end of June. Because Mars had to then make a square with, as it moved direct, it made a square with Pluto on December 23rd. And then it made a square with Saturn on January 13th. And it has yet to make a square with Jupiter on January 22nd. These dates are absolutely key in the unfolding of the events of the entire last year. And it's because Mars, the faster moving planet, faster moving compared to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, Mars is the trigger planet. And it's built up an amazing amount of energy in Aries, where it's at home. Now, normally we think when a planet's in its home sign, that's great. Well, Mars is already the planet of war and anger, and it's the superhero planet that basically takes control into its own hands and does whatever it needs to do to get to where it's going. And it's impulsive and it's spontaneous. And Mars has been overamped for 6 months, or overamping, and yet it's been squaring powerful systemic Pluto that has to do with the underbelly of all the systems that we're working with, and squaring Saturn, holding it back, restraining, and Jupiter saying, okay, go for it. Now, the thing is that as the planets as Jupiter and Saturn moved into Aquarius, Jupiter caught up with Saturn in December of last year. And so now Jupiter is leading the pack. And so in these last few days, couple of weeks of these Mars squares that began last August, happened again the end of September and through October, and then Mars turned direct right around Election Day. We're now moving into new territory. And then Mars reaches the square to Pluto, and that's the intensity of what's been buried coming up into the open, and the setting up of the conflict around Christmas time. And of course, we had the insurrection itself on January 6th, as the moon was moving through this delicate area of the sky. In fact, Mars had just moved into Taurus. Mars moved out of Aries on the day of the insurrection. It's like at the end of a sign, we get this energy and we feel like, oh, we're desperate. We need to make it happen. We're going to lose our chance if we don't do it right now. And Mars actually entered Taurus on the afternoon of January 6th. And on the afternoon and into the evening of January 6th, Mars then squared Pluto and Mercury, and then, the moon squared Pluto and Mercury. And then the moon moved into Scorpio and opposed Mars. And that was at about 3 in the morning or so, at the time that Congress actually certified the election. Now, Mars here is the player because Mars is triggering the events. And so Mars was creating an upheaval of all of the past stuff on the 6th. And then, interestingly enough, we had a new moon on the 12th, and that new moon was aligned with Pluto, which again is dredging things up. You remember, Pluto is like the phoenix that arises from the ashes of the runes of destruction. And even at the Saturn-Pluto event at the bombing of the World Trade Tower, there had to be ashes for something to come up. World War I was another Saturn-Pluto event, if you will, where we saw that same type of destruction in order to create the grounds for something new to arise. But here's the thing. The new moon was on the 12th, and on the 13th, early in the morning, on the 13th, Mars made its third and final square with Saturn. When Mars runs into Saturn, the anger, Mars, the aggression and the direction, the energy, Mars, runs into a wall, Saturn. Mars Saturn is more often than not a reality check. Saturn says, this is it. Can't go any further. Saturn is the limit. Mars is the gas pedal. Saturn is the wall that it hits if you don't work the brake properly. So it's interesting that the impeachment occurred on the day when the trigger Mars, having already moved into Taurus, on the day it moved into Taurus, that was the insurrection day. But when Mars squared Saturn, that was the day that the impeachment actually occurred. Now we have the third and final shoe to fall or to drop on all of this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up the chart as we look ahead and see yet what Mars has to do. So here we are looking at a chart for January 1st, 2021. We can see that Saturn and Jupiter have already moved into Aquarius, that Jupiter is at a higher degree than Saturn because Jupiter is moving faster than Saturn, and the actual conjunction occurred back in December. We can also see that Mars is at 27 degrees of Aries. By the way, all times that I'll be using in this are Pacific times. I use an Aries rising chart, so you can be anywhere in the world. There's no horizon in this chart. All the planetary locations are correct. You need to adjust the time zone where you are to get the proper times. The times that I'll be giving are West Coast times, United States Pacific time. And the charts that we'll be looking at mostly will be for noon, which means that sometimes if I talk about something changing sign, and it might happen very early in the morning or later that day. And so sometimes you don't see it until the day, sometimes you see it the day before or don't see it until the day after on the charts that I'm looking at. But what I'm looking at here is the fact that Mars is at 27 degrees of Aries. And if we move this ahead just a day at a time, here's Friday, January 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Look at Mars now at 29 degrees of Aries, 5th. And on the 6th, Mars actually moves into Taurus. But again, we're looking at a chart for noon Pacific time, which would be 3 p.m. Eastern time, and Mars doesn't move into Taurus until later, until just a few minutes later. But what we're going to do here is we're going to move this ahead to January 7th, so you can see that Mars having already moved into Taurus. Mars actually moved into Taurus at 2:26 p.m. Pacific time, 5:26 p.m. Eastern time. What we can also see here, though, is that the moon moving from on the 6th and 7th, the moon moving from Libra where it would have squared the sun and Pluto and Mercury. And then the moon moving into Scorpio is squaring Saturn and Jupiter and coming into oppose both Mars and Uranus. The moon now on the 6th and into the 7th, the moon is the trigger that actually creates this temporary moving T-square involving Uranus and Mars. Mars, having moved into Taurus, is heading toward a conjunction with Uranus that it reaches actually on Inauguration Day. So we have this January 6th, 7th being a tinderbox moment. Now, what happens is over those days, though, the 7th, 8th, 9th, we have not only Mars having changed signs moving into Taurus, but we have Mercury and Venus both changing, Mercury from Capricorn into Aquarius, and Venus from Sagittarius into Capricorn. And so this few days after, the couple of days after the insurrection, there is a strong shifting of energies where we're being called to look further ahead. Remember, Aquarius looks ahead, Capricorn looks behind. They're both related to Saturn, but Saturn and Capricorn is about where am I? What do I need to do now to get to where I'm going? How do I hold everything together? What are the calculations I need to make? Where do I need to be? And what direction do I need to aim in before I start going? Aquarius is more futuristic, and Saturn in Aquarius is the rule breaker. Saturn in Aquarius is the scientist. Now, remember, in modern astrology, we've given Aquarius to Uranus and kind of taken away some of Saturn's capabilities in our own mind, but Saturn still got them. And so Saturn still is at home in Aquarius, but now Saturn is forcing us to break down the old boundaries, not be restrained by them, and move off into the future. And what happens is that when Mercury on the 8th enters Aquarius also, and this will be followed over the days and weeks ahead by first the moon, then the sun, and then Venus all moving into Aquarius, we're basically moving further and further and faster into the future. So this is January 6th, 7th, and 8th. I want to just jump ahead to the day of the new moon. And we can see here that on the 12th, I'm not going to put the exact moment of the new moon up, but the moon is moving now through Capricorn. And again, we're getting waves of that Capricorn energy. Remember, even though we're moving into Aquarius in so many ways, not the age of Aquarius, maybe resonant to the age of Aquarius, but it's likely the age of Aquarius is still 120, 30 years off or so. But we're definitely getting an Aquarian buzz. But we also now get this Capricorn buzz with Venus still holding on in Capricorn. Now we have the new moon in Capricorn. It's lined up with that new moon is conjuncting Pluto. And so again, there's this taking down of the old, the deconstruction in order to create the new. Now we go from the 12th to the 13th, and we can see now that Mars is also very close to making its third and final square with Saturn. That does become exact on the 13th, which is the day that the energy and the rebellion. Remember, Mars and Uranus are rebellious energies. Mars is heat, it's anger, it's the god of war, and Uranus releases tension wherever it was. Uranus doesn't give a damn about what happens once that tension is released. You know, when lightning strikes and burns down an entire state, Oregon, Yellowstone Park, Northern California. These are Uranian events when the lightning strikes. If things are not in balance, that flame burns, and Uranus's job is to strike the lightning. Uranus's job is not to deal with the aftermath. So we have here Mars getting closer and closer to Uranus, but Mars running into that restraint of the square to Saturn, boom, impeachment. Now, what happens here also is that we have Uranus, which you can see here is at 6 degrees of Taurus, and you see that S by it. Uranus, which has been retrograde for 5 months, is now holding still to turn direct. we notice the change of the inner planets when they move from retrograde to direct or direct to retrograde, because the change is so swift. The planets are moving so fast. But the outer planets, like Uranus, move slower. And so for all practical purposes, this whole period of time, we could go back a couple of days, and we can see that Uranus is within the same degree at 6 degrees of Taurus all the way from the beginning of the year. It's moving, but it's moving only by minutes of arc rather than a degree. And you can see that as we move this ahead, Uranus turns retrograde at 6 degrees, and it stays pretty much at 6 degrees for quite a while. I mean, for another week or so, that Uranus is at the same degree. The concept in astrology is that the slower moving the planet, the more power it holds. That's why Mercury retrogrades when they turn retrograde or direct, and we have a Mercury retrograde coming up at the end of the month. That's why those planets become so quirky and so strong and so powerful, because what normally happens like this instead happens like this. That's why the Mars retrograde through Aries made that so much more powerful and potent. It was like a cosmic perfect storm, if you will, that we're just at the tail end of. We're not done with it. Even though Mars is out of Aries, Mars is still in a high dynamic range. And even though it's past the square now to Saturn, which was again on impeachment day, I just wanted to point out that we also have Uranus now, Uranus that is stationing, which is holding that energy, that revolution, the rebellion, the disruption, and even chaos. And although I try to keep it simple here, we could also bring in Eris, which is also activated now by a square from Pluto, Eris being the goddess of chaos, amongst other things. But we need to remember that chaos isn't disorder. Chaos isn't unnatural. Chaos is what occurs when a complex system begins to break down so it can create a new level of simplicity. And so we have to be careful about our negative judgments about the disruptions that Uranus may be creating now and may continue to for a while. On the 14th, we also had the sun just after the new moon aligning with Pluto. The moon then kind of came across that. The moon moves into Aquarius. These are all very, very powerful and pivotal times. And that brings us up to the 14th and the 15th, when Mercury now moves into its shadow. Mercury will eventually turn retrograde. And then when it retrogrades, it will retrograde back to 11 degrees of Aquarius. It'll retrograde back to 11 degrees of Aquarius on February 20th. But what that means is that on January 15th, Mercury has entered that zone where the energy of Mercury will be slowed down because it's going to cover that area 3 times. Mercury will move through this area direct. Then it'll go retrograde in Aquarius all the way back to 11 degrees, and then it'll go direct again, and it won't move out of its shadow until mid-March, when it moves out of its shadow and then moves into Pisces. So this piece of where we are at right now. Let's bring this ahead now to the 16th. We're working on a Pisces moon today. It may be a bit of like, what the hell's going on? A bit of confusion. It may be dreamy. Both Saturday and Sunday. I said today. I actually the chart for today would be here. Sunday. We're working with the moon catching up with Neptune, and there's at once a level of dreaminess, of spiritual reaching towards something, of imagination is working overtime, and at the same time there's a bit of confusion going on because it's difficult enough to know what's real when we don't know what's real. And of course, on some levels, we've been in that situation where even if you know what's real with this issue, you don't know what's real here or there, because there's so many conflicting issues and definitions of real news, fake news. However, we can rest assured that as Mars hit that square to Saturn, we're getting that first wave of clean energy coming in and a readjustment, and just simply saying, no, that was fake. The idea that this election was rigged, the idea that Trump won by a landslide just because he said it, doesn't make it so. Now, if I lose you as a listener here, I'm sorry. If your politics are and your belief system is something totally different, I'm not going to change that. And I'm just saying that when we look at what's going on with the astrology, we can see that Mars square Saturn is certainly a reality check. Now, as we move along, though, we can see that we're also at a point where Jupiter, which is still a slow-moving planet, but it's certainly moving a lot faster than Saturn. Look, it's 3 degrees away from Saturn now. Jupiter at 6 degrees of Aquarius is squaring Uranus at 6 degrees of Taurus. This is a bit of hopefulness. It's a high jittery energy, especially with Mercury in Aquarius. There's a sense of the future is here, whether we want it or not. The game has shifted and changed. And Jupiter is expansive, it's opening. Uranus again is sudden, it's rebellious. Jupiter is genius, and I mean, often the most ingenious solutions are solutions that other people think were impossible. And so we have this Jupiter now making the square with Uranus, and Mars, which is moving faster than either Jupiter or Uranus, is coming into that square, and Mars will make that square. Mars will make that square to Jupiter. Remember, it's Jupiter, the slower moving planet, squaring Uranus on the 17th. But Mars, the faster moving planet, is going to line up with Uranus, and it is going to square Jupiter. And the actual dates on this are the Mars Uranus conjunction is the 20th on Inauguration Day, and Mars square Jupiter is on the 22nd. Now, understand that in the first round, as Mars was squaring the outer planets, the order was different because Jupiter was the first planet, Jupiter was the first planet, Pluto was the second planet, Saturn was the third planet. But because Jupiter is moving so quickly, actually we could go back a year ago, really quickly here. And we can see a year ago, the order here was Jupiter, then Pluto, then Saturn. But Jupiter, because it's moving quicker than the others, we come back to January 17th, and we now see that that Mars has already squared Pluto. It's already squared Saturn. And so that's the holding back, but now it has yet to square Jupiter, and it does that on the 22nd, a couple days after the inauguration. And this is opening. This is expansive. And again, regardless of what your politics, regardless of what your politics are, the fact of the matter is there is an expansive energy. There is a blue energy that has taken over the red constrictive energy on paper, legally. That's what has occurred. And so it's very interesting that this is all happening while Mars first hit the square to Saturn, and then it's going to hit the square to Jupiter. But in this, we have Jupiter squaring Uranus, which is basically breakthrough in thinking. It's an, oh my God, it's Mitch McConnell all of a sudden going, I got to basically cut, what's that saying? Cut bait and fish, cut fish and I don't know. There's something here about cutting it so you can get on. And I think that that's what's occurring right now. And this Jupiter square Uranus is certainly a piece of that. And that Jupiter square Uranus is really what's going on right now. It's the optimism that we're seeing on the surface, and yet we're also seeing stuff bubbling up underneath. We're not. I mean, the sun is still close enough to Pluto. There's still stuff that's coming up. I would like to say that whatever happened on January 6th is a done deal. It's not. There's bubbling that is coming from a very deep and plutonic undertone place. Remember that the United States is entering its Pluto return. We all know what the Saturn return is like in our individual lives at ages 29 and 57, 58. But a Pluto return can't happen to an individual because it only happens once every 245 years or so. And so the United States is going into this process of death and rebirth, of reinventing itself. And so we are on the tip of that particular iceberg. But what we're seeing right now is over the days ahead, we're seeing first the optimism from the Jupiter square to Uranus. And then on the day of the inauguration itself, we actually have the moon on the 18th on Monday moving into Aries. So we're getting another Mars buzz now. And remember, Mars in Taurus isn't crippled. It's just moving slower with a lot more determination. It's still going to get to where it's going, but that Mars first has a little bit of an encounter with Uranus. But the moon in Aries is really heightening up the excitation, the enthusiasm, the sense of urgency and immediacy is occurring. And then on the 19th, the sun moves from Capricorn into Aquarius. It happens later in the day. We won't see it here until we hit the 20th, but the sun actually moves into Aquarius at 12:39 p.m., just after noon here on the West Coast. That would be 3:39 p.m. New York time. But when the sun moves into Aquarius again, all of a sudden we're in again another step of the new world, the new, not the old. Things have changed. Things have changed by this period of time. And then we get to the inauguration day itself. Now, into this, we can't miss the fact that Mars is conjuncting Uranus. But look, if we back this up a few days, Mars has been close to conjuncting Uranus all week. We know we have a lot of energy aimed at this Mars-Uranus conjunction, whether we're an astrologer or not. I've heard many astrologers online talking about the angst and the fear that they have of what's going to happen on Inauguration Day, because in a way, Mars Uranus is kind of like the Tower card in Tarot. It's the lightning strikes, the tower burns down, everything's turned upside down. But here's the thing: in a way, the lightning is already struck. The inauguration might be after the fact. Now, I'm not saying there aren't going to be things that might happen on Inauguration Day, but something has changed. It's not the same energy. And Inauguration Day will actually be a bit of a clue that will tell us a little bit more about what will unfold in the days and weeks ahead. Because if we've done the work right, we have responded already to the Mars square Saturn. And we've done, or we're in the process, we've initiated a process of making it right, of retribution, of looking at the issues that it brings up. I mean, there are many issues aside from the fact that the Capitol was attacked. Aside from that, we have the whole issue of how it was handled, and the systemic response to, let's say, a largely white entrenched system, systemic group of people, compared to a group of, let's say, younger and or people of color, blacks. I mean, it has been noted just the difference in response between this and a peaceful demonstration that then turned angry because it was met by anger. So we have to be careful here about how we frame these things. But the fact of the matter is that Mars and Uranus together are like lightning striking. They are rebellion. They are insurrection. They are seditious. They are all those things. But often we can trigger a reaction to a transit by bringing it out in the open so we can work with the energy rather than having it still build, and then it explodes. Now, you could make the case that it's already exploded. You could make the case that it's still stuff is building. I think both are true, but I am not going to try to predict what will or won't happen on January 20th. I just know that if we look back at the determination of Mars in Taurus, and we see that even with the actual insurrection date, that the process of the stability of the US government, for all its good and for all of its evil, that held its own. And so I think that that's an important piece of all of this. And again, regardless of what your political beliefs are, obviously things need to change. Things are not okay the way they are, and I'm not going down that rabbit hole right now. All I'm saying is that we have structures that held, even though there was a breach in the flood wall, if you will. Now, as we move into Inauguration Day, it's important to note that the moon at inauguration is still in the last degree of Aries. The moon actually moves into Taurus at 10:55 a.m. Pacific time, but that's 1:55 p.m. Eastern time. So assuming that the inauguration unfolds in its scheduled timely manner at high noon, the inauguration itself will have that moon in Aries. Once the moon moves into Taurus, it will very quickly square the sun, which has just moved into Aquarius, and then it will square Saturn by evening, and then the moon will actually catch up with Uranus and Mars the following day on the 21st. But on the 20th, the actual Mars conjunct Uranus itself occurs at the exact moment. It occurs is at 12:37 p.m. That would be 3:37 p.m. in Washington, D.C. And so this might suggest that if we see some disruption, it might be after the inauguration rather than during or before it. But I'm not venturing a guess here. I just know that Mars Uranus is ready to release tension. And yet there's a whole lot of systemic Saturn and Pluto holding the energy down right now. And we'll see whether it's successful enough with the moon in Taurus and that moon going over Mars and Uranus later in the day, and then on through the early morning hours of the 21st. And then that moon will square Jupiter. We're in the hot zone again. It's like if an astrologer was in charge, they might not have put inauguration on that day. They might have held it off for a day or two, but it's there, and it's going to reflect the energy of that moment. We can also see, though, that Mars, which is moving faster than Uranus, will very quickly catch up with Uranus and move past it. And by the following day, Mars is at 7 degrees of Taurus, and it is by the 22nd, Mars is squaring Jupiter. Now, Mars and Jupiter is very different than Mars and Saturn. That was back on impeachment day. Saturn, the rule, holding back. Mars, Jupiter is inflationary. Jupiter says, pump it up. Mars is angry. Mars is still close to Uranus. We can see some real stuff coming out now, but we also have this sense of Mars squaring Jupiter of wanting to look at the positive, feeling like we're maybe through an eye of a needle, whether we are or not. Remains to be seen. And I would suggest that we are not, but I would also caution us from putting too much focus on the negative aspects of this, because remember, Mars conjunct Uranus is breakthrough. Mars conjunct Uranus is like the epiphany that occurs that opens us up into a new way of doing things in Taurus. It opens us up to a new way of perceiving reality, and its squared to Jupiter might in fact turn this into something way more positive than some people might imagine. And again, I'm not trying to Pollyanna this. I'm not trying to make the difficult stuff go away. As we move on to the 22nd is a Friday, we have the moon moving into Gemini later that day. And of course, the Mars is exactly square Uranus. On Saturday, that moon moving through Gemini is actually doing some really lovely things, because the moon is actually forming a trine to the sun, to Saturn, to Jupiter, and to Mercury, and in fact, a sextile to Chiron. And so the Saturday, the 23rd, I think has a bit more opening energy to it, except there's this backdrop of the sun coming up to Saturn, and here's again the other foot falling. I think we've had one too many other foots falling. I mean, we're humans. We can only have one other foot falling, but here we're having the other foot falling again, because on Saturday, in light of all of this kind of expansive, opportune, opening, intelligence, thinking, thoughts are flowing. Behind that, there is this reality factor of the sun lining up with Saturn. And when the sun lines up with Saturn, to quote my astrology mentor in reading only, Grant Louis, when Saturn conjuncts the sun-Saturn conjunction is a time when the chickens of ambition come home to roost. This is karmic. This is we get what we deserve. And even though there may be some difficulty tied up in this moment, some needing to push against the resistance, there is resistance here. This is on Saturday. What's important, though, to understand in all of this is that the sun is actually moving still about a degree a day as it does, and the sun will quickly catch up to Jupiter. And so we have this, what I call peristalsis, the squeezing and then opening, squeezing, then opening. Last year we had opening, then squeezing, because Jupiter was earlier degrees, opening, then squeezing. Now it's the other way around, and we're getting it kind of pulling in, getting it right, pulling in behind the wall, and then we're opening up. So on the 23rd, we have the sun conjuncting Saturn. We also have Venus forming a sextile with Neptune. There's some dream and imagination occurring here, but there is also still that heavy hand of karma coming around. This certainly can be a you get, we get, I get, we all get what we deserve when the sun is lined up with Saturn, because the reality shows through again. On Sunday, there's lunar transits. They're uneasy. They're mostly semi-squares, sesqui-squares. It's not an aspect active day, but there is annoying stuff. Maybe we're dealing with what's already gone on, or we're looking forward to what's coming up next. And what's coming up next on the 25th is that the moon moves into Cancer. And we have the sun making a healing sextile with Chiron. This is on Monday, Monday the 25th. We have the sun forming a sextile with Chiron, the moon moving into Cancer. For the first time now, the moon moving into Cancer won't be opposing all of those heavyweight Capricorn planets. It'll catch up with the opposition to Venus and Pluto, but it'll really be when the moon moves into Leo that it moves opposite Saturn and the sun and Jupiter and Mercury. And we'll get that before the end of the month because we have a full moon coming up in Leo that we will get to in just a moment. On the 25th, we can also see, though, that the sun moving faster than Saturn has now reached the same degree as Uranus. But we're going to be feeling this on Monday as that sun is pushing that square to Uranus. It's another replay of the expression of that which has been held back, the anger, the irrepressible energy here, which is being shown by its conflict with the radiance, with the brilliance of the sun. And yet on Monday, there also could be some people holding back. The moon's in Cancer. People are very protective. People might not say all they have to say because they're afraid of what would happen if, in fact, they say it. But that sun coming to square Uranus early Tuesday morning is incredibly powerful. And then the moon does make its oppositions on Wednesday. Did we skip over Tuesday? Yeah, Tuesday is the sun square Uranus day early in the morning. Let's get that. There's Tuesday. On Wednesday, we have the moon moving into Leo at 6:53 p.m. And this changes the energy a little bit, a lot of it. But what's happening now is the moon is moving toward its full moon, and the moon will actually reach the full moon on January 28th, and it occurs at 11:16 a.m. here in Seattle. That's 2:16 p.m. in New York. Adjust your time zone accordingly. But this full moon of Leo, the show, the expression, opposite these planets now in futuristic Aquarius, and it really is, that moon is opposing Saturn. That occurs at 3:40 a.m. All of these are Pacific times. Then the moon will square Uranus. That's at 7:11 a.m. And then we have the full moon at 11:16. Then the moon will oppose Jupiter at 11:38 a.m. And then the moon will square Mars at 2:32 p.m. This is a hyperactive full moon. And we can see this is almost like the day of the insurrection when we saw the moon moving through Scorpio, making these T-squares when the moon was in Scorpio, squaring the Aquarius planets and opposing the Taurus planets. Now we have the moon in Leo opposing the sun and Saturn and Jupiter and Mercury and making a square to Uranus and Mars. And in all of this, we have the sun reaching an exact conjunction with Jupiter at 5:39 p.m. We have this optimism, we have this hope, we have this expansive, we have this flourishing. And I want to say that this is going to be a very powerfully futuristically oriented, amazing full moon. Except I can't, because there's always something else going on, isn't there? God, why is that? And the other thing that's going on is that Venus has caught up with Pluto at the end of Capricorn. And we also have at this full moon, it's exact within 3 hours of the full moon, we have Venus forming a conjunction with Pluto. And when Venus lines up with Pluto, we're not satisfied with what's on the surface. We have an attraction, Venus. We have a desire, Venus. We have a need to get to what's underneath the underneath. And so this could be a rather heavy day because on one hand, we have the full moon and things coming out into the open. We have the awareness of the difference between objective reality, the sun, and subjective reality, the moon. There's this inner outer thing going on that goes on at all full moons. It's a fruition, so we can actually see the difference between our own personal perspective point of view and what's out there that is the generally agreed upon reality. Remember, it has been said that reality is simply the agreed upon apparency. And so this full moon is very potent because it's a full moon opposed Jupiter, and it's not far away still yet from that Saturn. So we're getting this kind of opening, and yet with Venus conjuncting Pluto, we're not just letting go. We want the meaning, we want the guts, we want the merge. You know, that Pluto being conjoined by Venus. In a way, it reminds me of Thomas More, the guy who wrote all the soul books. He wrote a book called Dark Eros. When you have love, Venus, you don't just get the pretty side, you get all of it. If you think you're just getting the pretty side, well, that's just one part of it. Everything has a shadow, and the full moon in bright Leo opposing the futuristic sun lined up with expansive, optimistic, beneficent, auspicious Jupiter has a shadow. And that shadow is the desire to get things that were hidden and perhaps bring them out into the open. We have one other thing that we need to talk about as we get closer to the end of the month. I mentioned it earlier when we looked at Mercury going through that 11-degree point, because I said Mercury was going to be slowing down until it turned retrograde. Mercury actually turns retrograde on the 30th. Now we can see here on the 29th, Mercury gets that little S by it, which means it's stationary, it's not moving. We're now recovering from the full moon. And by the 30th, the moon moves into Virgo, and Mercury being the ruling planet of Virgo, Mercury turns retrograde on Saturday morning. The exact time is 7:51 a.m. Pacific time, but I think that these times for retrogrades are often more exact than the reality warrants. Regardless, this is going to set the tone for February, because that Mercury will retrograde back through Aquarius, back across the sun, back across Jupiter. It will not reach Saturn, but we'll reserve that to talk about next month. There's two other little just droppings I want to make because they both impact the end of the month. One of them is that although we had the Saturn square, the Mars square Saturn, and we had the Jupiter square Saturn and Mars. What's also happening here, because Mars is moving pretty quickly, it took forever for the Sun-Mars square to become exact. But that Sun makes the exact square to Mars because Mars is still moving away from it. It's like it's not reaching it, it's not reaching it. And then finally, Mars makes the exact square. The Sun makes the exact square to Mars on February 1st. Now, the reason why that's important is that, again, we're feeling the anger that's still there. We're feeling the annoyance, the need to do what's right or to step up to the plate, the annoyance at those people who won't do what's right, whatever it is that we deem right. The other piece, though, is that not only is the Sun going to be coming into a square to Mars, but also Venus changes signs on February 1st. And we can see here that Venus is the last of the faster moving planets holding out in Capricorn. And so by February 1st, when Venus moves into Aquarius, and this is how we'll begin the February talk, we now no longer have 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in Capricorn. Instead, we have 5 planets in Aquarius, and that'll take us all the way up to the Aquarius moon, when we'll have 6 planets in Aquarius. And so the energy has changed. I'd like to make the official announcement that March of 2020 will finally end on February 1st of 2021. It was an 11-month month. One other last thing here that I just want to mention, we'll spend a lot more time talking about this next month, or on the February forecast, and that is that Saturn, as it moved into Aquarius, began to pick up on its square to Uranus. This will be the major theme for 2021 all the way through the year, and in fact, even through 2022. This is the slow moving heavy energy of Saturn in Aquarius. This is the structure Saturn now moved into a new structure, Aquarius, and Uranus, the rebellious energy, the initiation. I'm sorry, the innovation of making new things, but in Taurus, Uranus doesn't want to move very quickly at all. So we're going to see the struggles between the old and the new, the conservative and the progressive, that is actually going to become very deeply seated, and it will have grown out of what we've seen up until now. I want to make two other points before I close. I know this has gone long. Um, the first point I want to make is that normally this mid-month update is available only to my solar participants in Patreon. But on months that I think are extremely important, I like to make it more widely available. There was such important energy this month, and this month has been already just crazy, and it's not over yet, that this is actually a public video. I want to express my deep appreciation to my patrons who actually make this work possible, that actually give me the time to put in the research and the editing and the creation of these videos. Thank you very much. And I think everyone needs to owe them a gratitude, a bit of thanks, because they make this possible on those months when I also bring this to the wider public. Feel free to share this. This is a public video. And the first of the month video that will be out on the 1st of February, obviously will also be a public video. The other thing I want to say is I just want to put things into perspective once again. These are extraordinary times. If you are feeling unsettled, freaked out, bent out of shape, if you are depressed, if you are wondering how you're going to pay your rent tomorrow, or how you're going to feed yourself or your family, if you are going through difficult and or crazy things, it's not you. Well, it is you, but it's also you, and me, and all of us. This is an overwhelming period of time. We humans have an extraordinary capability of adapting, and we've had to do some of that adaptation all through 2020. It's been a year of regrooving and reorienting, and all those retrogrades, reviewing and reconsidering. Well, it's not over. And especially since we have this Mercury retrograde coming up. It doesn't matter what you believe is true. What matters is what your values are. And I think that what we're seeing is reality is pushing on us, all of us, hard enough that whatever we believe has to go, whatever we believe has to be looked at in perspective to whatever it is that's true. And I think that largely we are suffering from, and I'll include myself in this because there are many issues that I have beliefs on that I have to readjust what my beliefs are, because they're not based on something true. And so, when we look at our orientation to our home, our family, our sense in the world as a wage earner, our sense as a small business owner, our rights as a human being, our rights as a as a privileged white person or as a black or person of color, that it doesn't play the same game, can't play the same game, just because of the way the system is stacked. When we look at our politics, when we look at what we believe about self-care and health, and the failing American health system, whether we believe there should be free health care, or whether we believe that the healthcare system we have is a sick care system that maintains our illnesses rather than really helping us get better. Whatever your beliefs are, whatever my beliefs are, we need to begin uncovering the truth, because we need to adapt what we believe to what is true. And we've all fallen down a bit of a rabbit hole. Boy, that's an overused metaphor these days. We're all like Alice in Wonderland, because we've fallen into a world where the things that we thought we knew, we now realize we didn't know. And so I want to close this talk today by just reminding all of you and me that we're human. We may think at times we're God-like. We may think at times we're gods, but we're only human. Or maybe we should say we are extraordinarily human, and that we get to adapt and reframe, and we get to create reality in the way that we envision it. Sure, there are limitations. There are structural limitations. There are systemic limitations. There's gravity. There's things like we need to eat and sleep, and that we have bodies and so on. But ultimately, we are at a turning point. And I've said this several times throughout the year, but I don't mean January. I don't mean January of 2021. I mean 2012 through 2026. A decade plus period of time that will go down in history as one of the most dynamic periods of change humans have ever seen. And each and every one of us needs to, we have no choice. We must step up to the plate. We must step up to our lives and figure out what we are going to do, how we are going to respond at this moment in time. Are we going to hold on to some old belief structure that simply doesn't work anymore? We're not even getting something out of it that at one point in time we or our ancestors might have? Or are we going to look at the future and decide how are we going to get on the bus and help steer that bus so it goes in a direction that works for the common good and not just a few? That's it for now. More than ever, think cosmically, think as cosmically as you can, but act locally, act as locally as you can. I'm Rick Levine.